Hey everyone, how's it going? Earlier this weekend, I was busy competing at one of the BABW qualifiers, and I finished in a decent place, third place. But more importantly, I secured myself a place in the finals for the BABW. So I'm pretty pleased about that. Yeah, it was a pretty fun experience. I played a very aggressive Leela deck, standard Leela, as well as Butcher Shop NEH. Both decks did pretty well, and it just feels so good not only to be playing regular Netrunner with criminals. I love playing criminals so much, and it's happy that I'm quite optimistic about what Temujin does for the criminal faction. Also, it was a very fun experience because I got to meet a lot of friends, both new and old, and more importantly, I had a lot of fun with my games, a lot of new things learned instead of just loafing around waiting for my intentional draws to finish. Yep, IDs were not allowed at BABW, and that was very warmly well received by the community, including myself. I'm very happy about that. So let's actually get down to the meat of this video. This Leela deck, this is the deck that I brought to BABW. I've been tinkering with various iterations of it on Jintaki.net, and I'll be showing one of my games in a short moment. So the main attraction of this deck is the indexings, which are your R&D aggression instead of using like turning wheels or R&D interface. I'm not sure if it's the correct decision, but one thing's for sure. It enables freedom through equality, which is an amazing combination against decks which get you to 6 agenda points, but have it very difficult for you to finish closing out the game. It has your standard good stuff, criminal tricks like emergency shutdown, obviously a count siphon, and even some tag hate against the CTM matchup, which is pretty brutal. All in all, it's a pretty solid deck. It is basically a Gabe that reskin in Leela because Leela's ability is just so good. Alright, so let's get down to the video. Today we are up against Engineering Future, and the storyline is always the same. You have to very aggressively try to get to match point as quickly as you can before they get set up with all their taxing ice. Otherwise, you're kind of doomed. Now, that was a very iffy opening by my opponent, scoring a domestic sleepers right off the bat against Leela Patel. Well, I'm just gonna siphon you. All 4 credits gone. Just like that. Well, that was a very good start for me. And it makes me scratch my head and wonder, am I playing against Jank? Why is my opponent scoring into domestic sleepers? At this point, there are a couple of possibilities running through my mind, most notably the fact that my opponent might be running Archer. That is the only reason why my opponent will be playing the Bolton Intimidation this early. So I'm just gonna aggressively hit R&D here and hope to find an agenda, but to no avail. You cannot really sit back and start drawing cards hoping to hit that indexing. There are only 2 copies in your deck. You don't always hit them. Sometimes you just have to go for the single accesses. Although in this case, it just might not be that good because I don't have Desperado out. Now my opponent spams remotes. Well, if he decides to score a beta test or something, that would suck. But hopefully I can retaliate with same old Siphon. We'll see how that goes. But for now, I'll set up with my Gordian Blade. I have a Dirty Laundry in hand. I chose not to play it last turn because I'm saving the Dirty Laundry to run whatever he might rest this turn, which in this case is an unprotected Eve campaign. Now, you have to exercise a lot of discretion when trashing remotes. This is one of the key decision points when playing as criminal. It's not an autopilot as you would with Wizard's recurring credits. In this case, I'm trashing the Eve campaign because my opponent is so poor, and he already spent the money to rest the Eve campaign. So I'm not really losing much. In fact, it is almost certain that that's a good move for me. Now, my opponent attempts to ice his Adonis this time. This is a good move by him. This means that I can't simply face check the Adonis. So the next thing I'm going to do is to sneak door and try to hit an agenda in hand. If I hit the agenda, I can bounce the remote ice and then trash his Adonis. That was my plan, but it failed. Both sneak doors netted me Ash in HQ, and there's a Chrysium that is installed on HQ. I cannot trash the Chrysium, I'm 1 credit short. Having the Desperado would help with that, but I just don't have the tempo to play it, and unfortunately my opponent seals off all central servers, so that's the end of the aggression. So now we move from the very early game phase to the early to mid game phase. This is the phase where all servers for that matter, are locked up by ice. So when you transition to this phase, it's all about phase checking, choosing the right server to phase check, and trying to abuse the hell out of that server. So today I have 6 credits, so I install a Mongoose first because the Mongoose would protect against Architect. And sure enough, it was the Architect that was lying on Archive. So very, very good decision by me to install the Mongoose. Being on exactly 6 credits, I left myself with 2 clicks and 3 credits on the Sneak Door run to both be able to break Architect as well as any nasty click ice like Ichi 1.0, like Victor 2.0. Now, my follow-up to the Architect was to de-res it with emergency shutdown because there was no other ice available for me to de-res. I would like to slow down my opponent's tempo as quickly as possible. My opponent attempts to rush on agenda here, which is a big mistake against Leela. I don't see any reason why my opponent wants to fast play this. He's trying to play aggressively against a deck that is faster than him, which is kind of a big mistake in my opinion. So my opponent gets a 5-3 agenda out. It's a priority requisition. I guess I can see why he wanted to score that now. It kind of makes sense, except that it doesn't really. Can you think of why? Give me a reason why you think scoring a Pyrrhec to res a Heimdall is not a good idea right now. Think about it. In the meantime, I'll continue on with my play, but first I need to decide which server to bounce the ice on. Usually it's HQ, but I have a Temujin and Career Fair ready to go in my hand. I can't Temujin HQ because there's a Chrysium Grid there, which denies Temujin money. So it only makes sense to bounce R&D ice so that I can actually get up to speed with credits. This is more important than sieging HQ and trying to trash the Chrysium at this point. I need to get the money lead first. With money, I can break ice with my icebreakers and then go trash his Chrysium. So priorities. Get the Temujin going and then attack his other centrals. So, all I saw was Architect on R&D, so nothing changes there. And obviously my opponent decides to re-ice R&D after the fact. So, what do I do here? I'm not going to liberate more money off Temujin, there's no need to do it. Instead, I'm going to attack the Chrysium Grid on HQ. And I have to decide between Sneak Dooring and running straight through. I decide to Sneak Door because that was a guaranteed Architect that was sitting there. I knew it was there because I de-resed it earlier. I hit the same Ash in his hand and then trash the Chrysium. Now I go again for a second run. Not because I want to install Polyp, but because I was going to play same old emergency shutdown. This is why scoring the Pyrrhec was a bad idea. For 5 advancement counters, 5 clicks, 5 credits, I wiped it out in the span of 2 clicks with the same old emergency shutdown. So that's a huge tempo swing in my favor. That 5-3 agenda didn't do my opponent much good at all. It forced the same old thing, sure, that's the same old thing that I can't use on account Siphon, but that's a minor speed bump in his favor. So now I continue my assault. I want to play aggressively. I still have no agendas to my name, which is a very bad sign, given that we are now approaching the mid game, where my opponent is starting to solidify on credits. So now I'm hitting HQ, and I see a Cobra. This is a very good ice to see. Mongoose loves eating up that Cobra alive. True to theme. Unfortunately, I still don't see any agendas. I'm going to run Archives here to fetch an agenda, because there are lots of face down, 7 face down cards. Surely he must be stashing agendas at this point. I also knew that he was running Punitive, so even if I hit 2 5-3 agendas, I won't get killed because my opponent was way too poor. So I was happy to steal an agenda and I got the Domestic Sleepers worth 0 points. Now you might be thinking, it's probably worth it for me to play the Freedom 3 quality before running Archives last click. My response is that is a very risky move, because if there's no agendas in Archives after all, and my opponent has Domestic Sleepers in hand, they can score it to remove my Freedom 3 quality, and that's a huge deal. Now that I know his agenda suite, seeing Domestic Sleepers and Pyrrhec, I can reckon that my opponent's running 7 3-pointers. So I absolutely need Freedom to fire off, because stealing two big agendas is much easier than stealing 3 big agendas when there are only 7 agendas in deck. Hence, I need to save the Freedom 3 quality for an opportune time, one that guarantees the agenda score, one like Indexing, which I now have in my hand. Unfortunately, my opponent now ices R&D, so that's not an option. I kind of figured that that's the Eli on R&D because I saw it off R&D just now. So now I draw into Temujin, so I'm looking to Temujin next turn, but the Siphon comes in. So I'm like, oh, that's a very good time to Siphon. Better get the Siphon in before my opponent finds more ice to put on HQ. So I'm going to Siphon him, and the good thing about playing against HB is that you know they're not running any tag punishment, especially not after you see the Punitive in hand. That's less influence that can be spent on tag punishment. So we Siphon my opponent, which is very important, bringing them down to 3 credits. This is not where HB wants to be because they can't threaten any dangerous ice. The best they can threaten is Eli. But keeping that in mind, I still know that running R&D is probably a mistake because I'll just hit the Eli for nothing. So, my opponent hyperdraws with Jackson, and here's where I pause the video and take you through what goes through my mind when I'm faced with a situation, a rather complex one, such as this. Now, the first priority on my mind is to kill the Jackson. I think most people have this instinctive reaction. It's a good move. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. That will cost 1 click. What am I going to do with the remaining 3 clicks of my turn? This is something I should think about before I take any clicks. Planning your entire turn ahead of time is often good practice. If you have read the article written by Xenasis, 7 things you can do to get better in Netrunner, it's on StimHack. If you haven't read it, be sure to do so because it contains a lot of valuable advice, including this. Plan your turn ahead. So, what am I going to do? Looking at my hand, there are not many cards that I really want to play. Freedom 3 Equality, Indexing, and Temujin are generally cards you want to play early on in your turn. And generally you want to dedicate your whole turn to get all the money off Temujin or to fetch the agendas from Indexing. So, given that I'm already going to spend 1 click trashing the Jackson, I can't afford the time to play any of these cards. Networking, I could get rid of the 2 tags I have. That is an option. The problem is it's a rather subpar option. Because what's the point of getting rid of the tags now? It's not like my opponent's going to scorch me the very next turn. It's not like I have any high value resources on the table. I have a daily cast, but my opponent's so poor that trashing the cast is probably not in their best interest after all, because that gives me another turn to abuse the centrals while they're poor. So that leaves me with Special Order. Special Order allows me to get my final breaker, the paperclip, which I need to get past Eli, which costs exactly 3 credits, which my opponent has. So you think of it down that way, you realize that the next order priority is to get the paperclip. So I should dedicate 1 click to using Special Order to fetch paperclip. Now you know about paperclip's ability. You don't have to install it from your hand like you do with Mongoose or Guardian Blade. You should trash it so that you save the click on installing it. And I know my opponent's probably not running Chronos Project given his agenda suite. So, what I need to do is to actually overdraw to 6 cards so that I have the ability to chuck paperclip at the end of my turn. So that's 1 click spent drawing, 1 click running Jackson, 1 click playing Special Order. What do I do with my last click? I could draw for 1 more card, but all the cards in my hand are quite high value. I don't want to chuck any cards if I draw a very good card. So the last click can be spent gaining a credit, or why not clear a tag? I have networking in hand. I might as well make some progress on clearing the 2 tags so that I can perhaps play Temujin on a future turn. Now that we have the general blueprint of our next turn, all we need to do now is to sequence our actions the correct way. So obviously, you draw first. That might open up possibilities that might change your plans. In this case, it's a sure gamble. It doesn't really change my plans. So all I'm going to do is to follow the plan. Run the Jackson Howard, clear the 1 tag, and then play Special Order to fetch paperclip, leaving myself on 6 cards so that I can discard the paperclip. This is planning in advance, and it pays off very well because, because you make the correct decision to actually draw before running the Jackson. Who knows? The card you draw might have changed your decision. It might have been a legwork that, you might want to legwork instead of running the Jackson first or something to that effect. Anyway, or it could be a pull-up, right? It could be a pull-up that would cause you to run HQ first and then install a pull-up to kill the Jackson. So keep that in mind. Of course, this doesn't apply to my deck. I don't run pull-up in this deck, but you certainly could. Anyway, my opponent finds their combo, Adonis, Breaker Bay, Ash. So what do I do here? I indexing. I know that my opponent's cheapest ice is Eli. So I know that I have an unhindered path through R&D with the indexing. This indexing allows me to see a voting machine initiative. That's exactly what I want to see. So I rearrange the cards with voting initiative on top. Then I play Freedom 3 Equality, erasing the ELP that you just played. This allows me to run R&D for only 1 click instead of having to pay both clicks. And steal the voting initiative and get the Freedom 3 Equality and bouncing a piece of ice, bringing me up to match point at 4 points and allowing me to run the remote, trashing the Ash, beating the Ashtrays, killing the Adonis, crippling the Breaker Bay grid. Welcome to Leela's world. Leave yourself open to vulnerabilities for just 1 turn, and everything comes crumbling down with fire. So that's a very big mistake my opponent made there, thinking they could get away with a very greedy Adonis campaign and an ELP. That freedom through equality was so huge. Not only does it bring me to match point now, all I need to do is steal one more big agenda to win. More importantly, it allowed me to erase his current. That allowed me to contest the Adonis remote in the same turn. So that was a very big swing in my favor right there, and I was able to capitalize on it in true criminal fashion, snowballing out of control by directing Temujin on HQ and running 3 times to regain the money that I spent trashing the Adonis. My opponent can't even spare the time to trash the Temujin. That's how poor my opponent is. He tries to res a Breakaway Grid, finally reses the Eli on R&D, but it's pretty cheap with Paperclip. Just 3 credits. And, ooh, that's not good news. That is a lot more painful. Ravana on R&D. I had to click through it. I'm not going to spend that much money on Gordian Blade. And then I swing over to his remote to trash the Breakaway Grid. Now that's one interesting technique you saw there. My opponent purposely left himself on 8 credits so that he could res the Heimdall 1 to protect the Breakaway Grid. But I forced the run on R&D, forced him to res both eyes on R&D so that he would become poor, and I can swing over to his remote to kill his Breakaway Grid. This means that he doesn't get the Adonis campaign that was coming up, or any campaigns he has in his hand for that matter. And this further slows down my opponent. My opponent's still dirt poor with only 4 credits, barely able to rest that Turing to keep me out of the Jackson remote, but you can't keep her out when Leela is so rich. Still have 8 credits on Temujin, still have a gamble in hand. Man, my opponent is not making much headway, although they have finally res at 1 piece of ice on every single central. So no more free runs, no more free Temujin runs. Now Temujin's only going to make my money back. In other words, make my runs free. Temujin's not going to make money anymore, it's just going to make my runs a lot cheaper than it otherwise would be. Now, I draw 2 cards and I decide whether to clear the tag or not. I decide to clear the tag here because I might as well do it, right? I could choose to draw as well, because even if my opponent decided to trash the Temujin, they would be on 0 credits, and that's not good for them. Anyway, I continue hitting HQ, just in case my opponent mandatorily drew into an agenda, and I played the same old thing. In the distance, you could hear the tolling of a bell, symbolizing the end for my opponent. Why? Because that same old thing implied a fork. I could siphon my opponent to death, or I could indexing for the straight win. So since they iced HQ, I went for the indexing, seeing 5 cards, 2 of which were going to be agendas that won me the game. With so many credits with Temujin, I was able to break through Ravana with ease, along with Eli, twice, to steal the 1 agenda I need to win the game. And I use tolling the bell as an analogy here, because my opponent was completely helpless. They were in checkmate. There was nothing they could do at that point to save themselves from this fate. The best my opponent could do was to throw something in the remote and force me to run it, because that could be the 3rd copy of Jackson Howard that blocks my indexing. Otherwise, they really would have to hope that the 5 remaining big agendas left in circulation were all stuck at the bottom of R&D, which was very unlikely given the number of cards remaining. So I hope this game was a good expository to the typical game flow of playing Leela, and more importantly, how you are constantly trying to use your ability in conjunction with huge tempo swing cards such as Account Cipher and Emergency Shutdown to prolong the stages of the early game and the early mid game, which are the times where you shine the most, which are the times that you can poke the most on centrals for the agendas that will eventually nab you the win. Thanks for watching, happy night running, see you around.